Clara Hayes never imagined that answering a simple job post would lead her to the doorstep of one of the richest families in the state. She had arrived at the Westwood estate with a single suitcase, tourism zone wrinkled, one pristine heart held together by hope and old wounds. The gates had towered above her like the mouth of a giant. She remembered how her hands trembled as she pressed the intercom, her breath fogging the cold air. "I'm here for the nanny position," she had said, forcing calm into her voice. 10 minutes later, a housekeeper led her through the polished halls of a mansion so immaculate it felt like it had never been lived in. Everything gleamed, everything echoed, and then she met him, Damien Westwood. He was standing in the sunroom with his back to the light, a phone pressed to his ear, sleeves rolled to the elbow of a navy dress shirt that probably cost more than her rent. His face was handsome, in that sharp, reserved way that spoke of power, but not warmth. He hung up the call and turned to her with the kind of gaze that made people feel small without him saying a word. "You're Clara Hayes," he said. "Yes." "You worked with children before?" "Yes, for nearly 8 years. I have experience with children who require emotional support, behavioral guidance, and you were fired from your last job." Clara's throat tightened. "I left. It was mutual. Yet there's a gap in your references." She hesitated. "There are things I don't put on paper." He studied her then in a way that felt flirtatious, but like he was deciphering a puzzle. And then he said, without ceremony, "My son hasn't spoken in over a year. If you can reach him, the job is yours. If not, I'll ask you to leave." Clara blinked. "No interview, no trial period. You have one afternoon," Damien replied. Then he turned and walked away. That was the moment Clara first met Leo. She found him curled up on the floor of a small room with space-themed wallpaper and unopened tie boxes stacked neatly against the wall. A boy of about 5, maybe 6, staring at a corner where sunlight met carpet, silent and still. "Hi there," Clara said gently, crouching down near him, but not too close. No response. "I like your planets," she added, glancing at the mural of Saturn above his bed. "Did you know Saturn has over 80 moons?" Leo did not react. Clara smiled softly. "I used to want to be an astronaut, but I got motion sick on roller coasters. So here I am, still nothing." But she didn't push. She just sat there for an hour, then another, talking sometimes, silent others, just present. By the third hour, he slid a crayon toward her, and Clara knew she wasn't going anywhere. Damien did not expect her to last the week. He'd hired nannies from the best agency-trained experts, therapists, even a behavioral specialist once flown in from Boston. None lasted more than 3 days. But Clara stayed. She didn't complain about the long hours, the lack of direction, or the walls Damien built with steel. She simply did her job and did it with a quiet grace that disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. He caught her humming once, walking Leo down the hall, holding his hand as if it were made of glass. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt something else. It was week 2 when Leo spoke for the first time. Clara had been building a cardboard rocket ship in the garden with him when he whispered, barely audible, "More tape." She froze. "Did you just say something?" Leo looked up at her. "Need more tape." Clara's heart swelled so fast she thought it might burst. They spent the rest of the day talking about stars and space cows and why Pluto deserved better. That night, Clara typed a simple note and left it on Damien's desk. Leo spoke today about tape and Pluto. Clara, no fanfare, just facts. But Damien read that note a dozen times before placing it gently in a drawer. Over the following weeks, a rhythm emerged. Clara would help Leo dress, make pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, and pack his tiny backpack for his therapy sessions. She learned what triggered him and what calmed him. She discovered he hated loud noises, but loved watercolors, that he cried when people raised their voices, but laughed at knock-knock jokes. She also learned about the silence of the Westwood estate way it swallowed laughter and echoed footsteps, How the staff never spoke above a whisper. How Damien's presence filled a room like gravity, but rarely warmth. Clara didn't push. She simply filled the empty spaces with patience. And slowly, Leo filled them with laughter, with questions, with stories about imaginary planets. She once overheard him say to his teddy bear, "Clara is my earth." She went to the laundry room and cried for 10 minutes after that. Damien began noticing the changes. Leo smiled now. He ran down the hall. He asked questions, made jokes. One night, Damien came home late to find Clara and Leo asleep in a blanket fort in the living room, flashlights still on, books scattered like leaves. He stood there for a long time. Something cracked open in him that night. He didn't know what to call it yet, but it felt like the beginning of something real. The housekeeper told Clara that morning, "He's not like this with anyone." Clara didn't ask what this meant. She just smiled, then made Leo a rocket-shaped sandwich. Still, Damien kept his distance. He remained formal with Clara, rarely showing emotion, often wrapped in phone calls or business meetings. But some of the messes sometimes linger near the kitchen while she laughed with Leo, or sit in his study a little longer, watching the garden where they played. And Clara noticed, even if she never said a word. 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, Leo fell ill with a high fever. He clung to her, delirious, crying out in confusion. Clara stayed by his side for 36 hours straight. She sponged his forehead, read him stories, sang softly until he slept. Damien found her in Leo's room, asleep in a chair, her head resting against the bed frame, fingers still wrapped around the boy's hand. She looked exhausted and perfect. He covered her with a blanket and sat beside her for the rest of the night. The next morning, Leo's fever broke. Damien brought Clara coffee and said only, "Thank you." She nodded. That was the beginning of the shift. One afternoon, Clara was folding laundry when Damien appeared in the doorway. He rarely came to the guest quarters. "You've done more for him than anyone," he said quietly. Clara looked up. "I just showed up," she replied. "He did the rest." Damien took a deep breath. "He talks about you in his sleep, says you make the shadows go away." Clara's eyes welled. "I think he makes mine go away too." Silence stretched. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Please stay." Clara nodded. "I wasn't planning to leave." From that moment on, things shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably. Damien joined them in the garden more often, helped with bedtime routines, ate dinner at the table instead of his office, and slowly, the mansion came alive. One night, Leo whispered to Clara, "Do you think he loves you?" Clara blinked. "Who, Daddy?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I hope he does," Leo said. "Because I do." Clara kissed his forehead, heartful and breaking all at once. "I love you too," she whispered. And in the dark hallway, unseen, Damien stood listening and smiling because he knew he did. He loved her. It was the garden that changed everything, not with any grand gesture or magical transformation, but with slow afternoons, soft sun, and the quiet growth of something deeper than words. Leo had claimed the garden as his planet. "This is where astronauts live," he declared one morning, dragging a watering can nearly as tall as he was, and rocket plants grow faster than regular ones. Clara had smiled and crouched beside him. "Then we better plant more." And so they did. Carrots in one corner, sunflowers in another, rows of tomatoes that Leo insisted would taste like space snacks if they grew under the moonlight. He wore his homemade astronaut helmet made from cardboard and duct tape. And every morning, Clara played along. "Captain Leo," she would salute. "Garden base is ready for launch. Copy that, Miss Clara." He grinned. "Prepare for liftoff." They spent hours there digging, watering, talking. Sometimes, Damien would watch from the window. At first, he had simply been observing, but over time, he found himself drawn to the rhythm of it all. The way Clara bent down to meet Leo at his level, the way she never rushed, never scolded, never patronized. She listened, and Leo, in turn, bloomed like one of the very flowers they planted. And Leo, in turn, bloomed like one of the very flowers they planted. One day, Clara found Damien standing by the garden gate. He looked uncertain, one foot inside, one foot out. She smiled. Want to join us? He hesitated. I don't really do gardening. Leo ran over before he could decline. You can be our mission commander. Damien raised an eyebrow. Is that a promotion? It means you tell the rocket where to go, Leo said seriously. But Miss Clara's still the boss of snacks. Damien laughed for the first time in weeks. A soft, low sound that startled even himself. I think I can live with that. From that day forward, the garden became their sanctuary, a place where roles blurred, where Leo called them team and not employer or nanny, where Damien let himself sit on the ground and get dirt under his nails, where Clara felt for the first time in years like she belonged somewhere. They built a small wooden bench beneath the pear tree. Leo named it the thinking spot. Sometimes he would sit there alone and hum to himself. Sometimes Clara and Damien would sit there two side by side, not touching, not speaking, but sharing something quiet and significant. One evening, Clara stayed later than usual. Damien had offered to walk her to the staff wing, but they ended up by the thinking spot instead. The garden was bathed in twilight. The air smelled of damp earth and new blossoms. Crickets began to chirp in the tall grass. Damien sat down slowly, one hand still wrapped in a wrist brace from an old injury. Clara joined him, folding her hands in her lap. You've changed everything, he said quietly. She turned toward him. I haven't done anything magical. I just showed up. That's more than most people do. She looked down, unsure of how to respond. Then Damien said, Leo laughs now. He runs, sings, pretends. I used to think I'd lost him forever. You never lost him, Clara said softly. He was just waiting for someone to remind him he was safe. Damien studied her, and then he asked the question he'd been avoiding. Why did you really leave your last job? Clara stilled. She had expected this moment eventually. I worked for a family with 2 children. I was there for nearly 2 years. I loved those kids. But one day, the mother accused me of overstepping. Damien frowned. Overstepping how? I hugged her son when he fell off his bike, Clara said. She said I was too attached, that I was replacing her. And were you? Clara shook her head slowly. No, but he was scared. He needed comfort. Damien leaned back, exhaling. Some people are threatened by empathy. Clara looked at him. And you, are you? Their eyes met. Damien didn't look away. No, he said. I think I'm drawn to it. The next morning, Leo ran into Clara's room with a piece of paper in his hand. I made you something, he announced. She sat up and took it gently. It was a crayon drawing Leo and Damien standing in the garden beneath the stars. In a child's handwriting, it read, My family. Clara couldn't speak. Leo hugged her. You're staying forever, right? She nodded, throat tight. I'm staying, sweetheart. I promise. Later that day, Clara stood at the window, watching as Damien taught Leo how to tie a double knot. Something fluttered in her chest. She didn't dare name it yet, but it felt like a beginning. That night, Damien walked her to her room again. The hallway was dim, filled with warm lamplight and the lingering scent of bedtime stories. He paused outside her door. I've been thinking, he said. Clara looked up. That's dangerous, she teased, voice soft. He smirked, then grew serious. I want to keep this going, whatever this is. For Leo, for you, for me. Clara's breath caught. We can try, she said. One day at a time. He reached for her hand, then pulled back at the last second. Not out of fear, but reverence. Good night, Clara. Good night, Damien. In her room, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, holding Leo's drawing. My family, it said. And in her heart, for the first time, she believed it could be true. Clara Hayes would never forget that morning. It began like any other at the Westwood estate. Golden sunlight spilled into the kitchen through wide windows. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Leo sat at the table in his pajamas, animatedly describing his dream involving talking planets and a space dragon that only ate strawberry pancakes. Damien was already up and dressed. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves neatly rolled, and his hair combed back with precise intention. He sat beside Leo, scanning something on his phone, pausing occasionally to offer a half smile or correct a detail in Leo's tale. Clara entered with a stack of plates and her usual gentle presence. "Breakfast for my two favorite explorers," she said cheerfully, setting a plate in front of each of them. Damien looked up and met her eyes. His expression softened. "You know," he said, setting the phone down, "one day I'll have to return the favor. I should cook breakfast for you." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "The day you learn how not to burn eggs is the day I let you try." Leo grinned, poking his pancake with a fork. "Dad said he has a super important meeting today. A really, really big one." Damien nodded, his tone more serious now. "It's a deal I've been working on for months. Hopefully, after today, things can slow down." He turned to Clara and added, quietly, "I promise." It was those words he promised that would echo in Clara's mind hours later, when everything came crashing down. It was those words he promised that would echo in Clara's mind hours later, when everything came crashing down. The call came mid-morning. Clara was in the living room tidying up when her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. James, Damien's longtime assistant. She answered casually. "James." There was noise in the background, horns blaring, whined, a voice too shaken to be calm. "Clara, there's been an accident. Damien's car, a collision on the highway. He's being taken to Central General. The paramedics unconscious." The rest blurred. Clara didn't even realize she had dropped the toy she'd been holding. Her fingers went numb, her mind emptied. She barely remembered grabbing her coat or telling the housekeeper to watch Leo. All she knew was that she had to get to that hospital. The sterile white walls of Central General did nothing to comfort her. The waiting room was filled with strangers, but Clara could barely process anything beyond the sound of her own breathing and the pounding of her heart. James met her near the elevator. His face was pale, his tie askew. "They're stabilizing him now," he said. "Head trauma. He's in critical condition. They're preparing for surgery." Clara couldn't speak. She couldn't move. Then a single thought pierced the fog. Leo. She left the hospital and drove to the school on autopilot. When Leo saw her standing in the office, his smile faltered. "Why are you here?" he asked. "Is something wrong?" Clara knelt down slowly, steadying herself. "Sweetheart, your dad was in a car accident this morning. He's at the hospital. The doctors are taking care of him right now." Leo didn't say a word at first. His lower lip trembled. His hands clutched the straps of his backpack. Is he going to die?" he asked in a whisper. Clara's heart broke. "He's strong. The doctors are doing everything they can, but he needs us to be brave for him." Leo's eyes filled with tears. He took Clara's hand and didn't let go the entire ride back. That night, Clara sat beside Damien's hospital bed. He was barely recognized of bleed-ups, monitors, bruises across his face. Machines beeped rhythmically, and the room was so quiet it felt sacred. She leaned forward and spoke, voice soft and steady. "Damien, it's me, Clara. Leo's okay. He's scared, but he's okay. He needs you. We both do." She stayed all night, reading, praying, hoping for the man who had promised to slow down, who had been starting to share his heart. Margaret Westwood arrived on the third day. She swept into the hospital room with a perfume that seemed to overpower even the smell of antiseptic. Her heels clicked on the floor as she approached the bed, eyes narrowing at the sight of Clara seated at Damien's side. "You're still here," she observed flatly. Clara rose to her feet, respectful but firm. "I'm here for Leo." Margaret's mouth twitched. And how convenient it must be, staying close to the Westwood name, to the money. Clara didn't respond to the insult. There was nothing to defend when you knew the truth. Soon after, Clara was summoned by Henry Callahan, Damien's attorney. He brought a folder and laid it gently on a table. Mr. Westwood made arrangements in the event of a medical emergency, he explained. He granted you temporary guardianship of Leo should anything prevent him from making decisions. Clara blinked, stunned. Me? But I'm just the nanny. Henry smiled gently. You're more than that. He trusted you. It's all signed and notarized. Clara couldn't process the weight of those words. Damien had entrusted her with his son, his life. But Margaret was furious. She filed a motion with the court almost immediately, challenging the guardianship. Accusations were made claims that Clara was manipulating the situation, that she was unstable, that she had no business caring for a Westwood child. The media caught wind. Whispers turned into headlines. Clara Hayes, the mysterious nanny at the center of the Westwood scandal. She ignored them all. Leo needed her. That was all that mattered. Nights were hardest. Leo would crawl into her bed, trembling, asking the same question over and over. Will Daddy wake up? Clara held him close and whispered the same answer each time. He's trying, and we're right here while he does. Leo nodded, his little body warm against hers. You won't leave me, right? Never, she said. Never, ever. By the second month, Damien's condition had stabilized. Still unconscious, still uncertain, but alive. Clara met with Leo's school counselors. She hired a lawyer. She stood her ground against the growing pressure from Margaret and her legal team. But most of all, she stayed. Every single day, she sat by Damien's side and talked to him. She read books, shared Leo's drawings, played recordings of his son's voice. Once, she pressed Leo's hand into his father's and whispered, "He's waiting for you." And the rainy Thursday afternoon everything changed. Claire was changing Damien's bedsheets with the help of a nurse when she noticed it. The faintest twitch of his fingers. She froze. "Damien," she whispered. Another twitch. She dropped the blanket and rushed to his side. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered, and then slowly opened. Tears poured down Clara's cheeks as she slammed the call button. Nurses rushed in. Monitors beeped. Dr. Bennett arrived and performed a series of simple neurological tests. "Mr. Westwood, if you can hear me, blink once." One blink, then two. It was real. He was waking up. Clara raced home to tell Leo. He was building a block tower in the living room when she burst through the door. He looked up, eyes wide. Did something happen? Clara knelt before him, barely able to contain her joy. "Your dad." He opened his eyes. "He's waking up, Leo. He's coming back." The boy launched himself into her arms. "I knew it," he shouted. "I knew he would. I told everyone." Clara hugged him tightly, tears mixing with laughter. "He's fighting, sweetheart, just like you." But not everyone was happy. Margaret demanded immediate access. She insisted Damien's recovery would prove Clara had no rightful place in their lives. The court date loomed closer. Clara stayed calm. She stayed focused. Damien was alive. That was the first miracle. And the second, he had chosen her before he even fell. That meant something. She sat with him the next night, holding his hand. "You scared us," she said softly, "but you're here, and we're not going anywhere." His lips moved slightly. She leaned closer, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said her name. Clara. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed with emotion. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm right here." And this time, she knew he heard her. The world didn't magically fix itself when Damien Westwood opened his eyes. He was back but not whole. The weeks that followed were filled with cautious optimism and painful milestones. The doctors called it a slow cognitive awakening. Damien could nod, blink, whisper. His words were sparse, his movements limited, but he was awake. And to Clara, that was everything. She never missed a single session of his physical therapy. When the therapists guided his legs into the first assisted movements, she clapped quietly beside Leo. When Damien tried to speak a guide horse, garbled cried, not because it was broken, but because it was real. Leo visited him every afternoon, holding his father's hand, reading from space books or simply telling him about his day. And every time Leo said, "I love you," Damien blinked twice. His way of answering yes. To blinks meant "I hear you." To blinks meant "I'm still here." To blinks meant "I'm still here." But not everyone was comforted by those blinks. Margaret Westwood stood at the edge of her son's hospital room, arms crossed, face unreadable. "He needs rest, not fairy tales," she said coldly, eyeing Clara seated by Damien's bed. Clara rose, her voice calm but firm. "He's responding. Progress takes time." Margaret didn't respond. Instead, she turned to her son, her tone clipped. "Damien, I need you to listen. You're being used. This woman." Damien stirred slightly, his brows furrowing. Clara stepped forward, instinctively placing a hand on his shoulder. "Stop, please. Not here. Not like this." Margaret narrowed her eyes. "We'll see what the judge has to say." The custody hearing loomed ahead like a storm cloud. Despite Damien's awakening, he was still legally incapacitated, which meant the court had to decide whether Clara remained Leo's temporary guardian or whether the boy would be placed under the custody of his grandmother. Margaret had an army of lawyers. Clara had Rachel and Hope. Rachel sat with Clara at the kitchen table the night before the hearing, folders and legal pads spread between them. "You've done everything right," Rachel said. "Leo is safe, loved, thriving, and we have evidence photos, skull progress, therapist's testimony." Clara nodded, though her hands trembled in her lap. "What if it's not enough?" she asked quietly. "What if the judge just sees me as the help?" Rachel met her gaze. "You're not, and tomorrow we prove that." Leo, sensing the tension in the air, was quieter than usual. That night, Clara tucked him into bed, brushing his hair back gently. "Are they going to take me away from you?" he asked, eyes wide. Clara's heart cracked. "I won't let that happen," she said. "But Nana said she's family and you're not." Clara took his hand. "Family isn't just about blood. It's about love. It's about staying when it's hard. It's about choosing each other." Leo looked up at her. "Then you're my family." Clara kissed his forehead, her voice trembling. "And you're mine." The courthouse smelled of polished floors and nerves. Clara sat at the long oak table beside Rachel. Across from them, Margaret sat flanked by two high-priced attorneys, her posture ramrod straight. The Jujia woman with kind eyes, but a firm mouth entered and called the room to order. Testimonies began. Leo's teacher spoke about his emotional growth since Clara's arrival. His pediatrician testified about improvements in his behavior, health, and communication. Rachel presented journal entries, therapy logs, school drawings, and evidence of a stable, loving environment. Then Margaret spoke. "She is a temporary caretaker," she said, gesturing to Clara without looking at her. "Not family, not legally, not ethically. She overstepped, took advantage of my son's vulnerability, and inserted herself into matters that do not belong to her." Clara didn't flinch, but inside, she shook. Then it was her turn. She stood slowly. "I didn't come to this house to find a family," she began. "I came for a job, but what I found was a child who was hurting, a boy who hadn't spoken in a year, a man who barely looked anyone in the eye, and over time through patience, trust, and love you healed. Together." She turned to the judge. "I don't want to take Damien's place. I want to stand beside him. I don't want to replace anyone. I just want to stay for the boy who calls me his home." Silence fell over the courtroom. Then Rachel handed the judge a letter. Leo had written it in crayon. "I want to live with Miss Clara. She makes me laugh and pancakes and reads to me when I have bad dreams. I love her. I don't want to go anywhere else. Please let her stay." The judge read it twice. Then she cleared her throat. "In light of the testimony, supporting evidence, and the child's well-being, this court sees no reason to remove Miss Clara Hayes from her role as temporary guardian. Custody remains as is, pending Mr. Westwood's full medical recovery." Clara exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Rachel squeezed her hand under the table. Leo clapped quietly in the back row. Margaret said nothing. She simply stood and left the room, Clara took Leo out for ice cream that afternoon. They sat under an umbrella, chocolate smeared on his cheeks, the sun warm on their faces. Does this mean we're safe now? He asked. Clara nodded. It means we keep fighting. But yes, we're safe. Leo licked his cone and leaned against her. I'm glad you stayed. Clara smiled. So am I. Back at the hospital, Damien was awake for longer stretches. He could now speak in full thou-short sentences. When Clara walked in that evening, he was sitting up, a sketchpad on his lap. He looked at her and said, I heard everything. Clara paused, her breath caught in her throat. The hearing? She asked. Damien nodded slowly. I heard you. I saw what you did. He reached for her hand. You fought for him. For us. Clara squeezed his fingers. I would do it all over again. He looked into her eyes. I'm coming back. Not just to walk or speak, but to be the man you and Leo need. Tears brimmed in Clara's eyes. We never stopped believing in you. Later that night, Leo climbed onto the hospital bed beside his father. Damien held him close. I'm proud of you, son, he whispered. I'm proud of you too, Leo said. You're my hero. They fell asleep like that, father and son, tangled together. The darkness outside finally quieted by something warmer than light. Hope. When Damien Westwood opened his eyes for the first time in months, the world returned to him in fragments. Light, pain, voices that sounded like echoes underwater. He didn't understand where he was at first. There were beeping sounds, the scent of antiseptic, something soft wrapped around his arm, something cold beneath his fingertips, and then her voice, Clara, soft, steady, unmistakable. She was telling him a story, something about Leo and a telescope. He turned his head slightly, and through the fog, he saw her. She gasped, Damien. He blinked once, then again. Her hand was suddenly in his, warm, real, grounding. You're awake, she whispered, voice breaking. You came back. He didn't have the strength to answer, but he didn't need to. She knew. She knew. The days that followed were slow, exhausting, and full of small victories. Damien had suffered a traumatic brain injury. He struggled to move his arms. His speech was slurred. Simple tasks like holding a spoon or turning his head back in monumental undertakings. But Clara never left his side. She was there when the physical therapist helped him sit up for the first time. There when he took his first unsteady steps, leaning heavily on parallel bars. There when he finally managed to whisper Leo's name, his lips trembling, his eyes filling with tears. Leo. It was the first full word he'd spoken since waking, and it nearly broke her. Leo visited every day after school. He brought drawings, stories, space facts. Did you know that Jupiter has a storm that's been going on for 300 years? He told his father proudly one afternoon. Damien smiled weakly, like Margaret. In a courtroom, Clara burst out laughing. Even Leo chuckled. That's a good one, Daddy. Damien met Clara's eyes. I still got it, he whispered. She reached for his hand. You never lost it. Damien's recovery took weeks. There were days when he was frustrated, when he threw his cane across the room or fell silent in therapy sessions. He hated being dependent, hated the way his body no longer obeyed him. But then Leo would walk in, or Clara would sit beside him, reading softly or humming while holding his hand, and the rage would fade. One evening, as the sun spilled gold across the hospital windows, Damien looked at Clara and said, I need to know everything. She looked up from her book. Everything. What happened? With Leo? With you? With Margaret? Clara took a deep breath, and she told him about the accident, about the weeks of waiting, hoping, praying, about Leo's nightmares and how he clung to her, about the court battle, the accusations, the moment the judge upheld his choice of her as guardian. Damien listened silently, his jaw clenched, eyes filled with orange tears. When she finished, he didn't speak right away. Then finally, you fought for him. Clara nodded. I fought for all of us. Damien reached up slowly, brushing his fingers against hers. I owe you everything. She shook her head gently. You owe me nothing. You gave me Leo. A week later, The doctors cleared Damien for supervised home care. The day he came home was clear and warm. Leo stood at the end of the driveway holding a handmade sign. "Welcome back, Daddy and Commander of our rocket team." Damien laughed when he saw it. "I've missed you," Leo said, hugging him tight. "I missed you too, little man." Claire stood behind them, eyes shining. He turned to her, voice low. "You kept him safe. You kept me alive." Claire smiled. "You came back. That's all that matters." Adjusting to home life again was not easy. Damien had to relearn how to climb stairs, how to bathe himself, how to dress without assistance. Pride often got in the way, but Leo made it easier. "Let's do it together," he'd say. Teamwork. And somehow, that little hand made everything feel manageable. Claire kept the household running, juggling Leo's school, Damien's appointments, and every quiet moment in between. But she never looked tired, only grateful, because he was home. One night, after Leo had gone to bed, Damien sat with Clara on the porch. The garden lights twinkled. The stars blinked above them. "I remember flashes," he said. Clara turned toward him. "From the coma, I think. I remember your voice. You reading to me." Leo laughing. She smiled. "We were always there." He looked down at his hands. "I was so afraid I'd come back broken." "You didn't," she said. "You came back stronger." He glanced at her. "You stayed, even when you had every reason to walk away." "I told you," she said, voice soft. "I wasn't planning to leave." There was a long pause. Then Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a bracelet, woven from the old lanyard Leo had made at camp. Claire stared at it. "He gave this to me the day I left for the meeting," Damien said. "Said it was for good luck." She nodded, remembering. "I kept it," he whispered. Even through the crash, Clara's hand trembled as she touched it. "This family," he said, "is everything I didn't know I needed." They didn't kiss that night. Not yet. But something shifted between them. A promise made not with words, but with presence. They were rebuilding, together. The next morning, Leo made pancakes. Sort of. He burned two, flipped one onto the floor, and drowned the last stack in syrup. "Perfect," Damien declared, eating them anyway. "You're just saying that because I'm the chef," Leo teased. "No," Damien said. "I'm saying it because I'm the luckiest dad in the world." Leo beamed. Claire watched them from the kitchen doorway, her heart full, her home complete. And for the first time in months, peace felt possible, not as a dream, but as a choice, one they had made, and would keep making, every day. The Westwood estate was quieter now, not with the eerie silence it once carried, but a calmer, gentler quiet. The kind of silence born from peace rather than absence. Damien had been home for 2 months. His recovery was steady. He could walk without a cane for short distances, hold Leo in his arms, and even return to light work from his study upstairs. But even as his body mended, another part of him remained hidden untouched. The part still haunted by the past, and Clara could feel it. It began with the attic. One afternoon, Clara had gone searching for Leo's missing telescope stand. Leo insisted he'd seen it in the dusty room with the spider museum, which turned out to be the attic untouched since before the accident. The air was heavy with old memories and unopened boxes. Clara found the telescope base near a stack of sealed trunks, each labeled in a neat, feminine script, AMW. She paused. One trunk sat half open. A photograph peeked out from beneath folded sheets of tissue paper. A young woman, smiling, her eyes strikingly familiar. Clara picked it up. Damien's late wife, Amelia Margaret Westwood. That night, Clara didn't sleep well. She wasn't jealous. Not exactly. But something gnawed at her realization that a whole chapter of Damien's life lay locked away in shadows. One he never spoke of. She couldn't blame him, but she couldn't stop wondering either. The next morning, over coffee, she asked gently, "Do you ever talk to Leo about Amelia?" Damien froze. mid-sip. Then he lowered the cup slowly. I haven't, he admitted. Not since she passed. Clara nodded. Do you want to? He looked out the window, watching Leo chase butterflies across the garden. I don't know how. Later that week, Clara found Leo alone in his room, drawing. He was unusually quiet. She sat beside him. What's on your mind? He held up a drawing of a woman with golden hair and a blue dress. Is this me? Clara asked, half smiling. Leo shook his head. It's my mom. I remember her sometimes, but it's like trying to remember a dream. Clara wrapped her arms around him. It's okay to miss her, she said softly, and it's okay to ask questions. Leo looked up. Do you think Daddy misses her too? Clara hesitated. I think he does. Very much. That night, Damien came to her room. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. I heard you talk to Leo about Amelia. Clara nodded. He brought it up. I didn't want to pretend she didn't exist. Damien stepped inside, his voice low. She died in a car accident. Leo was 3. I wasn't with her, and I always felt like maybe that was why she didn't come home. Clara's eyes filled with quiet understanding. You've been carrying that alone. Damien sank into the chair by her window. I buried her, and then I buried everything else too, even her name. I thought if I locked it all away, I could protect Leo, but maybe I was just protecting myself. Clara crossed the room and took his hand. She's a part of your story, of Leo's. You don't have to hide her from us. Damien looked at her. Pain and gratitude tangled in his gaze. I don't want to hide anymore. Over the following days, Damien slowly opened the attic trunks. Leo helped, Clara too. Together, they unpacked Amelia's photo albums, her favorite books, her recipes written in delicate cursive. Leo asked questions, some thoughtful, some childlike. What was her favorite color? Did she like chocolate? Did she ever sing in the shower? Damien answered everyone, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with tears, but always with honesty. One afternoon, they baked Amelia's banana bread together. Leo declared it to banana why, but ate 3 slices anyway. Damien saved the recipe card in the kitchen drawer. Clara knew that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant remembering without pain. In the weeks that followed, Clara began feeling the pull of her own hidden past. She hadn't spoken about her family in years. Not since the estrangement. Not since her brother stopped calling. Damien noticed the shift. You've been quiet, he said one evening, pouring her tea. Your turn to share? Clara sighed, folding her hands. I don't talk about my parents because I wasn't what they wanted. I chose a path they didn't understand. Left school to take care of someone else's children. They called it a waste. And after one fight too many, we stopped talking. Damien reached across the table and covered her hand with his. They were wrong, he said. You're one of the bravest people I know. Clara looked away. Maybe, but sometimes, I wonder if they ever wonder about me. Damien didn't push. He just held her hand and let the silence sit between them, not heavy, but understanding. One morning, Clara found an envelope at her door. It was postmarked from her hometown. Inside, a card. No name. Just 6 words in tight handwriting. I hope you're okay. I miss you. Clara sat down on the floor. Card in her lap. Damien found her there, eyes damp. She looked up. I think my mother wrote this. Damien knelt beside her. Then maybe the past isn't closed after all. As summer approached, warmth returned to the Westwood estate, and not just in temperature, but in spirit. Leo laughed more. Clara smiled easier. Damien stood straighter, and the ghosts that once haunted their halls had names now. Stories, memories, not monsters, but echoes. One evening, they had a picnic in the garden. Leo fell asleep under the stars, curled between them. Damien brushed a lock of hair from Clara's cheek. I used to think I could never love again, he murmured. She looked at him, heart thundering. And now, he leaned forward slowly, gently. I think I already do. Their lips met under, certain, quiet, like something that had been waiting for the right moment, and had finally arrived. The kiss they shared in the garden wasn't dramatic. There were no sweeping orchestras or fireworks lighting the sky. Just stars. Just the warmth of Damien's palm gently cradling Claire's cheek, and the way her lips trembled against his, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen, chosen, loved, and beneath it all, Leo slept soundly wrapped in a blanket, his small body curled up between the people who had become his entire world. It was a perfect moment, and yet Clara pulled back, just slightly, her breath catching. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "This, U.S." Damien looked at her, and in his eyes was none of the hesitation he'd once worn like armor. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The next morning, Clara woke to sunlight streaming across her bed and the smell of coffee wafting down the hall. She padded into the kitchen to find Damien standing at the stove, attempting to flip pancakes, while Leo offered instructions like a miniature chef. "No, now 8 more seconds. It's got a sizzle more." Damien laughed. "Since when are you the pancake master?" "Since I practiced with Miss Clara for 2 years." Leo grinned. Clara smiled, leaning against the doorway. She didn't interrupt them, just watched. Damien's movements were slower now measured from his ongoing recovery, but his face was full of color. His laughter no longer felt borrowed or cautious. And Leo had never looked so free. Clara felt something settle in her chest, something like belonging. Something like belonging. Later that afternoon, Damien asked Clara to join him on a walk through the estate gardens. Spring had begun to soften the landscape, petulips peeking through the earth, vines curling along the archways. Leo stayed behind with James, who had been unofficially re-promoted to mission control under Leo's strict supervision. Damien walked beside her, one hand brushing hers now, and then, as if asking permission each time. They didn't speak much at first. Then, at the edge of the rose arbor, he stopped. "I've been thinking," he said. Clara turned toward him. "About us, about Leo, about what comes next." She held her breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Not a ring box, just a velvet pouch. Inside was a locket, silver, elegant, engraved with a tiny planet and stars. When he opened it, Clara saw a picture of Leo on one side, and on the other, a picture of her. Tears sprang to her eyes. Damien's voice was thick with emotion. "You saved us, and not just from grief or silence or legal battles. You saved us from living halfway." She blinked, overwhelmed. "This isn't a proposal," he said, then smiled. Yet, Clara laughed through her tears. "This is a promise. That I'm here, that I want to build a life with Yunit just as Leo's dad, not just as a man recovering from mistakes and crushes, and ghosts, but as someone who sees you, who chooses you." She stepped into his arms. "I've always chosen you," she whispered, "even when I didn't know I was allowed to." He held her there, the locket between them, a promise sealed not with diamonds, but with presence. That evening, Clara sat with Leo on the porch swing, the locket now resting around her neck. Leo stared at it thoughtfully. "Is that me?" he asked, pointing at the photo inside. Clara nodded. "And Daddy, and you?" She smiled. "Yes, it's our family locket." Leo tilted his head. "Does this mean you and Daddy are gonna get married?" Clara blinked. "That's a big question." Leo shrugged. "I asked Daddy last year. He said he couldn't think about that yet. And now?" Leo smiled mischievously. "He said he was practicing his speech." Clara laughed and pulled him into a hug. "We'll take things slow, sweetheart." "But yes and day." Leo beamed. "I want to be the ring bearer, and also the astronaut who launches confetti when you kiss." Clara kissed the top of his head. "We'll make that happen." The days turned into weeks. The rhythm of life became richer, steadier. Damien took on more work, but always made time for dinner, for bedtime stories, for pancakes with Leo and lazy mornings with Claire. Clara found herself setting roots she never expected to plant. She joined Leo for parent-teacher meetings. She and Damien hosted a spring charity fundraiser at the estate, where she wore a simple emerald dress and stood beside him as both partner and quiet force. She began tutoring a few neighborhood children in the afternoons, something that brought her joy and purpose. The house no longer echoed with absence. It sang with laughter, conversation, and Leo's dramatic spaceship sound effects. One evening, after Leo had fallen asleep mid-story, Damien lingered in the doorway of Clara's room. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her fold laundry, watched the way she hummed a soft tune under her breath. "I love you," he said suddenly. She turned, startled by the vulnerability in his voice. "I know we've said it before, but tonight I needed to say it again." She stepped closer. "I love you too." He cupped her face in his hands. "I want more, not just someday. I want a life where you wake up beside me, where Leo calls you his mother without anyone questioning it, where this house is yours too." Her breath caught. She touched his face. "You've already given me all of that. Then let me make it official." He dropped to one knee, and this time, he did pull out a ring box. It wasn't flashy, just a simple gold band with a sapphire center, something he'd chosen because it reminded him of the night sky Leo loved. Clara covered her mouth. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. "Clara Hayes," he said, "will you marry me?" She nodded before she could find her voice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." He stood and pulled her into his arms, and when they kissed this time, there were no stars, just the beating of two hearts that had finally found their home. Leo woke up to the sound of giggling and padded into their room with sleepy eyes. "Did I miss something?" Damien lifted him onto the bed. Clara showed him the ring. Leo stared, then grinned. "Does this mean I get to call you Mom now?" Clara nodded, tears returning. "If you want to." Leo threw his arms round her neck. "I always wanted to." And so the promise was sealed, not with paperwork or declarations, but with love that had been tested and had endured, with family that had been chosen, and with a future that now shimmered ahead of them like starlight on open water. The morning sun lit the Westwood estate with golden warmth. The garden was in full bloom, lavender lining the path, daisies dancing in the wind, and sunflowers tall enough to rival Leo's ever-growing list of space facts. The Rose Arbor, once a quiet place of reflection, had transformed into the setting for something new entirely. A wedding, not a grand, elaborate affair like Margaret Westwood would have orchestrated, but an intimate ceremonious of few close friends, James fumbling with the sound system, Leo bouncing with excitement, and Claire standing at the center of it all. Her dress was simple, ivory silk, sleeveless, softly flowing, no veil. She didn't need one. Clara had nothing left to hide. Damien stood at the other end of the aisle, not in a traditional tuxedo, but in a navy suit that Leo had helped choose. "You look like a space captain," Leo had said proudly. Damien had grinned. "Good. I'm about to take the biggest voyage of my life. I'm about to take the biggest voyage of my life." When Clara stepped into view, holding a bouquet of wildflowers Leo had hand-picked himself, Damien's breath caught in his throat. She was radiant, but it wasn't just the way she looked. It was the way she walked, with confidence, with purpose, with love. With love. The ceremony was short and personal. They wrote their own vows. Damien spoke first. "Clara, when I first met you, I was barely holding on. My world was gray. Leo was fading into silence. I didn't know what I needed until you arrived. You brought light, patience, laughter. You reminded me how to hope again. You didn't just care for my son. You healed him. And you healed me." Clara wiped a tear as he reached for her hand. "I promise to spend every day learning how to love you better, to protect you, to choose your gain and again." Then it was Clara's turn. "Damien," she began, voice steady, "you were never the man I expected to love. You were guarded, grieving, complicated, but you were also kind, fiercely devoted, brave. And when I looked into your heart, I didn't see brokenness. I saw someone who still believed in family, even after loss." She turned to Leo, who beamed at her from his seat. "And Leo, I didn't give birth to you, but you grew inside my heart. You taught me how to stay when things are hard, how to be strong when someone else needs you. And I promise to be your mother, not just in name, but in every way that matters. Leo ran forward and hugged her tightly. I love you, Mom. Clara kissed the top of his head. I love you too, sweetheart. They were pronounced husband and wife beneath the rose arbor, petals fluttering in the breeze. James cheered too loudly. Margaret did not attend, but that no longer cast a shadow. This wasn't her story. It was Clara's. It was Damien's. It was Leo's. And they had rewritten it together. After the ceremony, they returned to the house for a small celebration. Leo gave a speech equal parts emotional and wildly off-topic. And that's why Pluto should still be a planet, he concluded, raising his juice box. Damien laughed so hard he had to dab his eyes with a napkin. Clara leaned into his shoulder. He's definitely ours. Every molecule, Damien agreed. As evening fell, they retreated to the garden. Just the three of them. Leo ran through the grass chasing fireflies, while Clara and Damien sat on the thinking spot bench beneath the pear tree. Remember when I first came here? She asked, resting her head on his shoulder. I remember thinking you wouldn't last a week, Damien teased. I almost didn't, she smiled. But then Leo asked me to stay, and I'm glad he did. They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the wind and the sounds of a home that was finally whole. Then Damien reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a leather-bound journal. Clara raised an eyebrow. What's this? He handed it to her. I started writing again, he said, after the accident. After you. It's about us. Clara opened the journal. On the first page, in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, a story of falling apart, a story of falling in love, a story of choosing family, a story of you. Clara closed the journal slowly, overcome. You wrote all this? Still writing, Damien said. It's a work in progress. Like us, she smiled. I'd like to read every word. That night, Leo insisted they all sleep in the same room just for one night. Because I want to wake up and see my whole family. They agreed. 3 beds pushed close. 1 laughter-filled room. 1 new beginning. Weeks later, Claire stood at the front gate of the estate, now legally renamed Westwood Hayes on the property deed. She was waiting for someone. Her mother. The card had been the beginning. Letters followed. Then phone calls, apologies, tears, and finally, an invitation. Her mother stepped out of the taxi with a hesitant smile. I can't believe how beautiful this place is, she said. Claire hugged her. You haven't even seen the best part. She led her mother to the garden, where Leo was preparing a space camp presentation. Damien joined them, warm and welcoming. And for the first time in years, Clara felt like every door had finally opened, not because of destiny, but because she had chosen this, fought for it, built it. That night, as she tucked Leo in, he looked up at her with wide eyes. Do you think families are born, are made? Clara smiled. I think the best ones are both. And in the quiet of the evening, with stars above and peace within, Clara finally stepped into the next chapter, not as a nanny, not as a guest, but as a wife, another, and the beating heart of a home that had once been broken, but was now completely, breathtakingly whole.